Today we will discuss about the cell membrane. Cell membrane forms the boundary of the cell and is highly active functional component of the cell, and it provides selective barrier and maintain a specific environment within the cell which is very much different from the outside of the cell. It maintains the intercellular organelles and intercellular activities. And if we look to the structure of the cell membrane, it is consisting of the lipid, protein and some carbohydrate molecules. Along the lipids, the phospholipid molecules are the major component, which is having a hydrophilic end or polar end and a hydrophobic end or non-polar end. The hydrophilic end, it is located on the surface, that is on the outer surface as well as in the inner surface, but hydrophobic end is located in the inner surface of the cell membrane. The thickness of the cell membrane is around 7.5 nanometer. Now let us see what are the proteins of the cell membrane. The cell membranes consisting of two types of proteins. One is integral protein and another is peripheral proteins. So integral proteins are mainly of major three types. These are transport protein or receptor protein or transmembrane protein, which spins the cell membrane from one side to the another side. And these receptor protein are responsible for binding with the different substances which regulates the cellular activities. Like that, transport proteins are also responsible for carrying different substances actively across the cell membrane, and transmembrane proteins also helps in this process, and they may act like enzymes. They can sometimes they behave as a water channel or ion channel and acting as a different pumps, and sometimes they work as a passive transport of different substances which are done by these integral proteins. Peripheral proteins, they are located on the surface of the cell membrane. They may be located on the outer surface of the cell membrane or in the inner surface of the cell membrane, and they do not protrude into the phospholipid bilayers and are embedded within the cell membrane, and they are associated with the cell membrane on the both extracellularly and intercellularly, as I told earlier. Some of the peripheral proteins anchored into the network of tiny microfilament of the cytoskeleton of the cell and are held firmly in the places. Cells are also having the cholesterol in their membranous structure. The cholesterols which are present in the cell membrane, it stabilizes it and makes it more rigid and regular and regulate the fluidity of the phospholipid bilayer. The phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane has a fluid consistency. As a result, the compositional structure of the cell membrane is characterized as fluid mosaic model. So here the lipid layers and protein layers mainly, they forms the fluid mosaic model. The phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane is permeable to certain substances and impermeable to other substances. This property of the cell membrane is called as selective permeability. And let us see what are the substances which can easily pass through the cell membrane. These are like oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, steroid and lipid soluble substances. They can easily pass through the cell membrane. And some of the substances which need some specific transport mechanism through the integral protein, these are glucose, ions and proteins. They can pass through the membrane bound proteins substances, whatever we told earlier. Some of these substances are transported through the integral membrane proteins using the pump molecules or through protein channels that allow the passage of specific molecules. So let us see what are the functions are performed by the cell membrane. Although we have said that cell membrane shows the selective permeability and forms a barrier between the internal and external environment, and thus protecting the internal components of the cell from the external influencing substances. They can easily permeate the oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, which are essential for cellular activities. Different steroids and lipid soluble chemicals are also passed through the cell membrane very easily, and the larger molecules of the which is required by the cell, that can be transported by a specialized transport mechanism. These transport mechanisms are of two types. One is endocytosis and another is exocytosis. Endocytosis is the process by which the cell membrane receives some substances within it, whereas the exocytosis is the process by which cell membrane releases some material from the cell. And among these, the pinocytosis and phagocytosis is the two type. Pinocytosis means if the cell membrane takes the extracellular fluid or liquid substances, that is called as pinocytosis, and obviously through the cell membrane. Whereas the phagocytosis, it is the uptake of large solid particles through the cell membrane. Cell membrane is also associated with the receptor mediated endocytosis, which involves the pinocytosis or phagocytosis by receptors, as I told earlier. The uptake of low density lipoprotein and insulin and example of receptor mediated is an example of the receptor mediated endocytosis. Okay, thank you very much for watching this video.